whole page just a moment.
Yeah.
But another way. You went up.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Oh.
Yeah. Time, past, present, future. Well, you're kind of defining that in because I saw a change and it was going this way. So you're saying, well, you see what I'm saying? You're using the thing that you're trying to define with. It seems circular to me.
So
it
it should seem circular because what I'm doing is saying, whoever is making the point. Here's the person saying this point right here. Well, this here is the past, and you're over here. Okay. What am I doing? And you're over here. And over here is what cause is, and I'm trying to turn around and say, no, cause is the same thing. So if it looks like there's a circle there, it is. As a Chinsaki would say, circling back to your other definition to say that that's what's going on.
The problem with that is that it's not definitional.
No, I'm not trying to define it. So let me be very clear. I'm not trying to define it. I'm saying if you give me two definitions, I'm not trying to define it. I'm saying if you give me a definition of the past, I'll tell you that my definition of cause is the same. All I'm doing is comparing your definitions. If you give me a definition of the future, I'm going to turn around and tell you the definition of effect is the same.
So
in a temporal vein.
All that shows, though, is that we observe time in change. That doesn't mean that they are, that doesn't mean that they're evil.
It does.
Not necessarily.
It does if this is the case. So if Leibniz's law is a reliable law, and it's the case that there are no properties that differ between this and that differ between that, then it does mean that.
No, I don't. It's like, you're driving down the road, right? Maybe this is an analogy. It's a faulty one, but we'll run with it for now, right?
We're
driving down the road. I see my speed by my speedometer. Does that mean the speedometer is speed?
No, that's my point about clocks.
And that's my point here is I measure time versus the change. That doesn't mean that they are the same.
And they happen within each other. Each is necessary for the other.
I'll ask it differently back to you. If you don't like, so this is a way to determine if two things, A and B, in reality are the same. How would you go about determining whether two things, A and B, are really the same?
I agree with Leibniz.
Okay.
But I'm not sure that you're meeting the requirement of Leibniz.
Well, I'll state it in Leibniz's words. I'm just looking for the properties that time has, and I'm looking for the properties that change has. And I'm comparing those two properties. And if I find any that differ, then Leibniz's law will say they're different. If I find them all to be the same, then Leibniz's law requires that they're identical.
All right. And what I'm saying is I'm not on board yet.
Fair enough. But we would only be on board
because
we should only be on board.
You're necessarily defining time in terms of change because that's how we observe time. But that doesn't mean that they are the same.
Have I given you a definition of time yet?
That's what that is.
No, I've given you no definitions of time. All I'm doing is listing properties that time has. I've only listed one.
Right.
So I'm not giving you a definition of time. What I'm saying is, when you're done defining time, I'm going to tell you it's the same thing as change, and I'm going to tell you based on this analysis.
I've got 2 points to make. I think one, I can show a difference on this rubric, but also I think that there's a better rubric to determine if things are identical.
Okay.
I think change has an additional property in that it generally, or at least it can mean not going on in the same way. Right? So there's an
say that again.
Of course.
Say that again. You said change.
Change means that something is not going on, not going along in the same way. Whereas time is, or at least can be seen monotonously. It could just be 1 second after the other. Change implies some kind of alteration. So I think that definitional, even using kind of Leibniz's model here, we can see a difference. But also, I think a better way to determine if they're the same thing is what Wittgenstein would say.
Can we do it one at a time?
Let me get through my whole thing.
Okay.
I think this is the less important one. What Wittgenstein would say is, don't try to figure out the essences of these things and compare them. He said, look at how we use these things in the language and come up with examples. And so I say, if we use his analogy where he's talking about driving, something's in front of us, we change lanes. Right? but we can't say time lanes. If we say we're going to time lanes, maybe we're thinking of a race and we're timing how long it takes one car to get together. The words aren't interchangeable in that case. When we're watching TV, we get bored with the show, we change the channel. We don't time the channel. If I say I'm going to have a sex change on Saturday, that's a lot different than saying I've got sex time on Saturday.
That's a lot better.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, so let's look at both of these.
We can change trains, right? That means we're gonna go in a different direction than we were going to.
Yeah, let's look at. I got it. Let's look at these separately. But
I just got a couple more examples.
okay. Well, I'll grant them for the sake of argument. I'll grant that all the examples show different uses of the word time and change.
But not only different uses, but different meanings. The meaning and the usage.
Okay, so the meaning is the important thing. So how many different meanings do you have?
Tons of different meanings.
Okay, so let's look. Let me think.
The next one was St. Paul changed his life.
Great. So here's the point. Here's the point here. If the word time entails, you said many, or maybe even more than many, but has many different meanings, what does that mean about our definition of the word time?
I was talking about change.
Okay, let's say the word change has many different meanings. What does that mean?
It can be used in different ways.
Okay, but what does it mean about the concept of change?
That it's variable. It can be used in different settings. To me, the meaning of a word is its use in the language. And so if you can use it in different ways, then that means it has different meanings.
Right, if it has different meanings, it's referring to different things, different concepts.
No, that's kind of like a Platonic way of thinking of that concept is one thing and that there's like this ontological reality and all things apply to that. But that's never been how our concepts or our words work.
Well, I think you're assuming that Wittgenstein is his analysis is
concept, but it can have various meanings that are very different.
So there's a basic fundamental law of logic that says that there are some informal logical fallacies, and these informal logical fallacies, some of them include the fallacy of equivocation. What is the fallacy of equivocation? The fallacy of equivocation is when you use the same word to mean two different things. So an example of this might be something like, I cooked, so something like this says, my friend smoked pot the other day. Pots are things that you cook things in. So my friend smoked something that you cook things in. And you would say, well, the form of that logical argument was valid. That was a valid logical form. But we would say and the problem with it wasn't that either one of the two premises were false, if you think about it. Both of those premises were true. So how do you use two true premises and valid logic in order to get to a conclusion that's obviously false? And the answer is the words you used in there, in both of those premises, referred to two different things. In the one case, it was a plant. In the other case, it was a piece of metal. So this is the fallacy of equivocation. If you use Wittgenstein and you say, no, there's no concepts underlying these things. The fact that the word pot refers to a plant and pot refers to a container, a metal container of some sort, is a false construct. It's an old Platonistic idea. And then all of a sudden, you can't say things like, well, that's obviously wrong, which it obviously is.
That's not the fallacy of equivocation. You said that the fallacy of equivocation is using the same word to mean different things.
Yes.
That's not the fallacy of equivocation. The fallacy of equivocation is applying one use of a word to another use of a word. So there's no problem with pot meaning both a plant and a pot in the implement. The fallacy comes in when you try to apply one meaning to the other meaning. So, and that's not what I'm doing. So it's not a fallacy.
So let me back up.
He's not trying to apply time to mean change. When you say I changed lanes, he's not trying to apply time to that. He's applying time to apply to a, not in that sense, no. That goes to the didicto and what's the Dirae.
Yep.
He's trying to establish the Dirae understandings of the concepts of time and change. Yes, didicto, you've got 17 different meanings of change. You've got, the dictionary has 550 different meanings of the word set. But you have to look in the context. in which you're, the array in which you're specifying the use of those words.
That's right.
One of the things that all the examples I gave has in common is that they indicate the change, a stop in the way things were going, and a transition to another
State.
Right, right, and that is not implicit in the concept of time. So it's these examples demonstrate that there is a conceptual difference in the word change and the word time. And if they're used completely differently, they're not equivalent. If they were equivalent, you could use them interchangeably, and there wouldn't be additional meanings to the word change that don't apply when we use the word time.
All right, let's use one of your examples and see if we can work this out. We time lanes. Okay. So in this word change up here, what do you mean when you say we changed lanes? What does this statement mean?
We physically moved from one lane to another.
Okay, we were in lane 1, the left lane, and then what did we do to get to lane 2?
Hopefully you put on a turn signal.
Okay, we put on it right. It probably didn't happen around here, but yeah, okay. So we were in lane 1, and we changed to in lane 2. So state 1 was we existed in lane 1. State 2 was we existed in lane 2. Okay, and it turns out that let's say that we want to be really hyper accurate, and we'll mathematically define that wide ticked mark that runs down between the lanes. We made it super fine, infinitely fine, and when the entire car is on one side, it's in the lane in lane 1, and as any part of the car is divided by that line, we'll say it's changing lanes, and then when the entire car is in the second lane, we'll say it has changed lanes to 2. So if you think about that, we changed lanes. The past in this case. The statement is made from which lane? Lane 2. Lane 2, because we started in lane 1. We said we changed lanes. If we were in lane 1 and we were going to change to lane 2, we'd say we're going to change to lane 2. But sorry, that was a confusing wording question. So we're sitting here in lane 2 and we said we changed from lane 1, or we're past that point. We're telling the story way in the future. Okay, why can't we say we timed the lane? Okay. So what we might turn around and say is, where's the past, what's the concept that we're describing here? State 1 is what in terms of time?
Prior.
The past, the prior, past, okay. And state 2 is what? Either the present or the future, right? So, and in short, which one, state 2, did state 2 exist because of state 1, or did state 1 exist because of state 2?
I don't.
Neither one of them.
Yeah.
Can you have state 2 without having had state 1? Can you have changed from state 1 to state 2 without having state 1?
But state 1 isn't the cause.
Which one is the cause?
I think it's something
The
separate.
cause is our decision to change the lane.
Okay, but which one sits causally prior? Let's say it that way.
S1 is temporarily prior.
Okay, so S1 would be temporarily prior. So you'll notice that here we are talking about changes, but one of them is temporally prior. So this is also where the cause is, and this is where the effect is. So in terms of cause and effect, it moves from lane, in this case, it's from lane.
I would say that S1 is the cause of
I'm not saying S1 is I'm not saying that
it's not
being in lane 1 is what caused us being in lane 2. So we'll agree that what caused it was the decision of the driver. And then after he decided, then we're into our Aristotelian material cause and effective cause, and forget about it. Let's just simplify it. The driver decided to change lanes. He then thought, and then electrons, and then motor neurons, and then turn, and then movement, and then hopefully counter steer, and all that kind of stuff. Maybe an observation in there, probably not around here. No signal. So we have lane 1, and what the initial state in lane 1 is causally prior to the eventual state in lane 2. It's also temporally prior from lane 1 to lane 2. They're ordered in the same order, and that order is invariant. None of the states are out of order. So the orders are the same. The states are in the same order. The states are identical, past and cause, and prior and post and effect are identical as well, depending on where you're looking at it from. But no matter where you're looking at it from, the labels stay the same. So then why is it that we don't say we timed the lane? Well, what do we mean by time? Now it's time for a definition of time. So what is the definition of time? Okay, so we want to ask the question. It seems like I'm trying to make the point here that the concepts we're talking about here are interchangeable. But why can't we linguistically say we timed from one lane to the other?
How about a definition for time? It's a measurement of the interval in which change occurs.
Okay, but you're going to measure an interval. Okay, but now how are you going to measure the interval?
Well, I mean, have you draw a definition?
Right.
Okay, but let's say forget about the measurement stuff. That it's a measurement of the interval from one state to another. Okay, so I'm going to say, yeah, that measurement is a change. So you say you're measuring time, and I say you're measuring change. The one thing that we can do is turn around and say, well, is it the case that the difference between state 1 and state 2 that we can say conclusively by the definition of change is a change? Yes, we can. That's obvious. By our definition of change, that fits neatly within it. When we say we're measuring the interval, we have to turn around and say something like this. Time just is the interval. So look at what people always do, and this is hidden, and I'm going to be highly critical of this one. People what I'm trying to do here is say there's an equivalence between these two ideas. You automatically bake into the definition of time. Because what you say is, time is the interval. Time is duration. You're the one claiming an equivalence, not you, but we are the ones claiming there's an equivalence between time and duration. So what should we have to do? If there's any difference between duration and time, that definition doesn't sit. Okay, so you actually have to go defending each one of these equivalences. So am I making sense at this point?
So
where I'm going with this is,
right.
There's a clear definition of change. There's not a clear definition of time.
That's correct.
And whenever you ask the definition of time, you get lots of hand waving, and you get lots of people like to point back to Augustine says on this one. I understand time perfectly as long as somebody doesn't ask me what it is.
Right.
Right. So you have to have a good definition of time, and I'll note that every opportunity that we get to give a definition of time, we give something that creates an equivalence to something else that's not entirely clear that's the same thing.
Right. And I think that's kind of what we just did.
Yes.
Change.
No, change we can clearly say. Change is anything where there is a property, if here's state 1, state 1, I can't write here, and state 2, and state 1 has a certain set of properties, and state 2 has another set of properties. If there's any difference, here's the difference in property, it was position. Or here's a difference in property, it was rate. Or here's a difference in property, it's location. Or here's a difference in property, it's in color. Or here's a difference in property, this one's prior and this one's posterior. If there are any of those differences, if there's a difference between them, then they're non-identical. And one of them is causally prior to the other. There's your change definition right there.
Yeah, that's change, but that's
the reason you can't interchange
using time as a metric.
Because you could have S1 and then S2 just be further along in that same lane, right? That's what we would mean by time. Time, if we're just talking about time, S1 would change to S2, which would be further along in the road, but it wouldn't be in the other lane. And in fact, we do use the words timing a lane when we talk about races, and we're timing each lane going straight.
Yeah.
You have to add another concept, the concept of change, to get from one lane to the other lane. It's not the same thing just as time is passing. You have to have something additional occur.
So I disagree with what you just said there in that we can change, like the state can be here. We started in S1 over here, and then we got to S2 over here, right? We changed lanes.
S1, S2 could also just be in front of S.
That's my point, right? So in this case, in the one case, you changed lanes. In the other case, you just changed position in your lane.
Time Yeah.
Say it again.
Time went by, but you didn't really change.
Time goes by in either one of them.
Because what I'm saying is, change means you're not going on in the same way. From S1 to S2, if it's in the same lane, it's going on in the same way.
No, you changed, in this case, from S1 to S, we'll make this S3, okay. From S1 to S2, you changed both position and lane.
Right.
And S1 to S3, you changed only position.
But it continued going the same way, right? So you could say, if you're counting 1, 2, 3, 4, okay, that's changing numbers, but you're going on in the same way. You say 1, 2, 3, 4, 10. You've changed your manner.
But that's why I wanted to go in here. I wanted to go in here. This right here, going along, means change occurred.
Yes, in one way, in a temporal way.
Right.
But when we use the word change, we can also mean that it's happening in a way not in the same way. But
sure,
can't
but
be used like that.
Look at this. S1 to S.
There's always a spatial change related.
Yeah, hold on. S1 to S2, how many things are changing? Sorry, S1 to S3, how many things are changing? We're just saying position. Position. Okay, how about S1 to S2? What's changing? Gosh, great. Let me try that completely again. S2. What's changing here? Position and? Lane. Okay, but the good point would be, well, if they're just both position, you made an arbitrary distinction in lane, and it's meaningful to talk about that, but at the end of the day, they're both just positions and change. So the position in lane, to your point of like, we may have been going in a particular direction, and the change from S1 to S1 to S3 means that there is a change in position, but not in a change in angle. And in the case of position and lane, it was a change in position and angle that got you there. But the point isn't that because there are two changes here and there's one change here, that somehow that means there was zero changes here. There's still one change here, and there are two changes there.
It's the type of change. It's not going on in the same way. That's what we mean by change. Like, that's what we mean by sex change, right? I was a male, now I'm a female. Okay, temporality is necessary. No change occurs without time, but we're not talking about the passage of time. We're talking about a transformation into a completely different manner of going forward. And it's not, from that point on, a person is a woman, not a man anymore. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about temporality.
So I will say that change can be used for, the word change can be used to mean even more things. Or maybe a better way to say it is this. Here's a set of changes. And here is a subset of changes that we call time. That's one way of looking at it, where time is a subset of change. The Leibnizian claim is that time and change are the same. The circle of change and the circle of time are the same circles. And the McTaggart claim is that time isn't a real thing at all. You're really just talking about change. So really my position is closer to McTaggart's. But the reason I want to say there's an equivalence between time and change is if we're willing to do the exercise and recognize this key point. So here's what I'm going to, this is going to sound unfair, and it always does. But if you think about it, it's entirely fair. In fact, it's the only way to be fair. You cannot use this definition of change right here. And the reason you can't do it is because it contains a contradiction. So if we're going to continue to debate about it, I'm going to say we cannot debate using this definition of change. You need a new definition. And the reason I'm going to use that is going along it absolutely entails change. Right? There's no such thing as going along without change. So your definition, it seems like to me, I could have this wrong, that you're assuming that as long as we're going along in the same way, the change is not occurring. Because look what you call that. You say not going along in the same way is what change is.
No,
so you can't use that.
That's not what I mean. I agree that even going forward is a change in time or whatever.
Okay.
But the concept of change also includes the idea of not going along in the same way. And there's many times when we use it that is an integral part of the concept. Like when we talk about sex change, or changing the train, or changing a lane. So
okay, but hold on. But that's what I'm saying.
My point is that these are not identical.
But Will, I want to have that discussion with you, brother. But here's my point. Just there in your argument, you used this definition, and what I'm trying to show you is this. This whole thing right here, going along in the same way, is what you say is not change. Right? So going along the same way would be changeless.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Okay, well then you're saying the opposite of that is change?
Both of them.
Right.
Yes,
right, and that's the problem.
But this part of change is an additional concept in the word change that is not included in the word time. That's my point. I think this whole idea of trying to get definitions is wrong-headed, because you can't define these concepts definitively. What you do is you look at how the word is used, and you look at examples. And
okay, but hold on. I'm not going to agree with you. So Wittgenstein is wrong, very, very wrong. And obviously, and by the way, that's not what Wittgenstein says. That's not what he says. So I went back at your behest and I read Wittgenstein. And Wittgenstein nowhere says that we're not talking about underlying concepts. That all you're doing is an analysis of the language. What he says is, very specifically is,
I didn't say we're not talking about concepts.
You did say we're not talking about concepts. You said talking about concepts as the underlying portion of a definition is an old and Platonic way of thinking things.
Essentials. Wittgenstein was against trying to essentialize a concept. Concepts exist, but they are varied in their usage and their meaning. There is no essence to a concept, and that's what you try to find when you try to get to one of these definitions.
When we're talking about a concept.
Years, and you've been studying for about a week.
Okay, but what I'm going off of is what Wittgenstein himself says, and what Wittgenstein himself says in quotation is, one must be careful, not one must throw them out. There's a difference between being careful and saying that there's no underlying thing.
Right, and I've never said that there's no concept.
Now, what I'll say when it comes to essential simply means a set of properties without which that thing would not be itself. But ultimately, Wittgenstein was not against properties being descriptive of concepts.
Yeah.
Okay, and so if what we're saying is concepts are composed of either one or more properties together that define what the concept is, Wittgenstein's not against that. That's all I'm trying to do here. And my point on the definition of change is, we can't use this definition of change because the change itself, A, is self-contradictory, and B, entails a definition of change within it.
This is one example of how the word change is used, and it's an example that the word time is not used. So time and change differ.
Well, what I'm telling you is this isn't a definition.
I don't care that it's a definition. It's an example of how change is used.
I care that it's a definition. I asked you for a definition, and this is what you gave me. So I'm asking you for a definition of change.
Right, and I've said that that's the wrong-headed way to go forward.
Okay, well, if we agree that Wittgenstein agrees that there are definitions in that, does Wittgenstein say there are no definitions?
He says there are definitions for certain. Definitions can be used ostensibly, like to say this is a cup and we can define it. But even with that, there isn't an essence to what it is to be a cup. You can give different examples. Maybe they all in that case, would all contain the idea that it can hold something.
So do you believe Wittgenstein is a realist? He does not believe that there's an ontological reality.
No.
Okay, but what you just said makes Wittgenstein an anti-realist. Because what you said was there's no what you said was there's no underlying concept to which this is referring. That means that there's no essence, there's no there.
There's no underlying concept. There's a difference between a concept and an essence of the thing. In essence, the way that Wittgenstein looked at it, basically criticizing Plato, is that there's a core, I don't know another word for it, there's a core essence to any kind of concept, and that's what all of its use derives from, and that's what its meaning derives from. Wittgenstein wants to get away from that. Doesn't mean that there aren't concepts, it just means that the concepts can be fuzzier and have different examples and can't always be pinned down to one thing, especially when we're talking about abstract concepts like love, time, change, things like that. That's where he says Western philosophy got off on the wrong track since Plato, because they were trying to define what these things are and find their essence. And then from there you could understand everything. But really all it did was lead people astray. And that's why philosophers are confused by some of these issues where normal people aren't, because people just go about in their daily lives talking about these things and using the words, and they do it perfectly fine. And then the philosophers want to come in and analyze it and try to get at the essence and lead themselves astray. This is what Wittgenstein called being bewitched by language.
So what Wittgenstein was actually revolting against was the idea of Plato's world of forms,
right,
which says that there exists an ideal out there that's the actual real underlying thing. He says that's not the case. And I think everybody today, almost everybody today, agrees that that's not the case either. But that doesn't mean that there aren't essential things that when you're talking about a cup, what you mean essentially by a cup. And Wittgenstein agrees with that. Wittgenstein says that you can make definitions, that it is necessary in order to have it. What Wittgenstein, one of his major points was, the reason he cautions you to be careful when using language is that equivocation, the fallacy of equivocation frequently arises if you're not extremely careful about what definition you're using. So rather than being anti-definitional, Wittgenstein is hyper important, he thinks, for us to make sure that we're talking about the same use of language describing the same ontological reality. He does believe that there's an underlying reality, and he believes that that reality is not one thing. He thinks that there are differences. There's a difference between this cup and this phone. Wittgenstein does not think they're all one.
Right.
He thinks that they are different. And so he says you have to be extraordinarily careful in what definitions you apply, because our common language is so fuzzy that if you try to use our common language alone, you're going to get messed up.
His focus wasn't on definitions, it was on use.
The point, I'm not saying his focus is on definitions. I'm saying
didn't really
that.
care about definitions at all.
Okay. Well, I can't. Let me at least point this out to you. I'm asking you for a definition of change. If you don't want to provide a definition of change, we can't have a conversation about it, because then we don't know what words to use.
The examples.
If we're talking about examples, those examples use words. And those words, in order for me to understand what words you're talking about, you have to have a definition of those words. If we differ on the definition of the words that you use in the examples, then we cannot agree.
What lane change is?
I do. I'm asking you if you understand what is entailed in change. So I pointed out that a lane change includes two changes. Do you agree with that? Two kinds of change. One is in changes a lane, the other one changes position.
At least two. There's also a change in the driver's mind.
Okay, that's three kinds. What else?
I don't know. There's physical changes in the person. There's probably a lot of.
Okay, at least two though. At least two. At least two
least
changes. Yeah. Okay. So the point that I'm making is, in there being at least two changes, that these changes that we're talking about have the same properties, whether you talk about them in terms of time or whether you talk about them solely in terms of change. They're temporally ordered. They are ordered in the same number of intervals. You can make the same number of changes is the same number of time intervals. Let's imagine for a second that they were quantized. Okay, so that space itself wasn't continuous, that you go from point 1 to point 2 to point 3 to point 4. There's a debate in physics whether this would be the case. And if that's the case, the interval from point 1 to point 2, the time interval, and the change interval are identical. It's the same thing. So the change from point 1 to point 2 in a quantized world is the same thing as the movement from point 1 to point 2. So if it's continuous, it's whatever arbitrarily defined interval you put there. And so my point is, you can't, all the things I'm describing right there, you would be hard put to use the word time to describe them. But that's because we don't have a good definition of the word time. Now we need a definition of. Yeah, but we need it. My point is, we need a definition of the word time and a definition of the word change to compare it. Okay.
So, if
Yes.
part of the reason I sort of am resisting your change equals time is because I don't want to give up one word for the other. I think you can't have change without time. I think that's a valid statement. I agree. And you can't measure time without change. But I don't want to say you can't have time without change. You did the example of the Trinity, they're not thinking anything new, nothing new is going on. But I imagine myself on a blanket in the field with someone I love, just lying there, not planning anything, just zoning out, watching the clouds go by.
Yep.
No conversation. And I think of the Trinity in that way. They're just lying in one another's arms, enjoying one another, not planning anything, not conniving how this is, that's all. And during that time, their affection doesn't grow, because how can it? They're already maxed. So I think without any change, without any change happening, still time is moving on while they're just enjoying one another.
But why do you think time is moving on?
Because I picture myself with someone enjoying their company.
But when you do that, the clouds were moving by.
Well, yeah, I mean,
But all change.
and that's why I'm saying that they're not absolutely equivalent.
Okay? So my point would be, take away the cloud movement. Okay? Take away, in fact, take away your breathing and your heart's beating and all that stuff. In fact,
that's changing a lot.
yeah, but at this point, and those are all changes that are occurring, right?
Right.
And it's on that basis that we would say time is ticking by. So on the we would say, we might ask it this way: how do we know whether or not time is moving while you're sitting there just in love with your loved one? And what you would say is, I know because there are changes going on. Now, let's say that you strike all the physical changes. So it's not the clouds moving by, it's not your heart beating. You're like, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the state in which I love this person. That hasn't changed.
Enjoying being with them while not actually doing anything other than enjoying being with them.
That's what I'm saying. Strike everything else other than the enjoying being with them.
Yeah.
Right.
Is that enjoying being with them ordered from state 1 to state 2 to state 3 to state 4? Or is the state the same?
I don't know.
The state's the same. The state's the same. You're enjoying being with them. I'm enjoying being with them. I'm enjoying being with them. So you're telling me that I'm enjoying being with them is what's going on. And then you're saying, well, there's the next state, 2, in which I'm enjoying being with them. And then there's the next state, 3, in which I'm enjoying being with them. And I'm saying there's no difference in those states. And Leibniz's law says they're the same state. So it's your job now to show me what's the difference between state 1 and state 3 in enjoying, what's the properties that are going on in state 1? I'm enjoying being with them. What's the properties going on in state 3? I'm enjoying being with them. Is there any difference between them? Nope. Leibniz says it's the same thing.
Because we could lay there for a second and be over and done. It's like, well, that wasn't very satisfying. Or we can lie there for an hour, and it would be, because of the extra time of not doing anything, it was much more enjoyable.
But this is how ingrained time. So keep in mind something that I'm going to say here is from the time that you were this tall, you've been told time is a real thing. What I'm saying, what if you've been lied to?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so how hard is it to unthink that that's correct? And the answer is it's super hard. But this is how we would go about doing it. And what I'm telling you is, right now, you haven't given me any justification for believing, as you're lying in this other person's arms, so to speak, that if you took away all the physical changes that are happening, you're like, that's not what I'm talking about. It's just the states. But I'm telling you, it's the same state. And that not only is there no change, there was also no time. And this is why I would say the Trinity, I agree with you at the end of the day. I agree with you. But the point is, that means that the Trinity existing by itself, essentially, necessarily, exists atemporally. Time is not ticking by. There is not time because the change state is the same.
Right.
There's nothing you're measuring. So we always say, well, we measure time, or we talk about a difference in time. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I'm out of change. Okay. All right. So to those who are new, I apologize. Whenever we're talking about the most fundamental things, it's very, very difficult. When we have an agreement, rapidly we'll run through the argumentation. But do you see why it's so important? So important. So here's why it's so important. If I turn around and make an argument that says this was God by himself, nothing else going on, and then he speaks something and you've got another thing that happens, and you got another thing that happens, you got another thing that happens, that the start of time is here, and that time moves in this direction. Because one of the things I'm going to say is this: it's impossible for there to be a line of time going eternally in both directions. Why? Because if there were an infinite series or sequence or points of time prior to this one, then you never would get to this point, the present. And this is why philosophers would broadly agree that time cannot be infinite in the past. So if it's impossible for time to be infinite in the past, and you're comparing models of the way the universe could be, there is a theistic model that says that's right, time isn't infinite in the past. God, there's no point in reality where God does not exist. In fact, God exists necessarily. But God's necessary existence does not entail an infinite regress in time. That's why we're having this discussion. If you're wondering what all this nonsense is about, it's that point right there. And that point right there is the major philosophical difference between why a theistic approach is logically consistent and preferable to a non-theistic approach which says the universe is eternal in the past. Now, there are other models of the universe not being eternal in the past. It's not the only one. But that one is broadly agreed upon, like, yep, that's right, it can't be that. That can't be the case. But if it can't be the case, why? And does your model, sometimes theistic models are accused of, well, your God is eternal in the past. And the point is, no, he's not. His time has not been just ticking by forever. That unless there's change, there is no time. So technically, I don't need time and change to be this identical for this view to be correct. All I need is for time to entail change. That is to say, if there is no change, there is no time. But I am going the one distance further and saying, gauntlet on the ground, somebody give me a definition of time first. And then will somebody give me a good definition of change? And I'll show you either that you can't define time in a consistent way or that your two definitions are the same. That's the gauntlet I'm throwing down. So I'm going even further than you have to go in order to get here. That's the point. So you don't have to buy what I'm selling. At a minimum, you just have to buy that time and change entail each other.
For sure.
Entail each other.
Entail each other. For sure, you can't have change you can't measure change without time. The question is, can you measure time without change? That's what I'm struggling with. If you imagine a world that goes to absolute zero, does time stop?
Okay.
And I'm not convinced one way or another.
Show of hands who can be here over next Sunday. Show of hands if anybody wants it canceled because they're going to be doing family stuff. Show of hands of people who didn't show their hands. Okay. We will hold it. We'll hold it next time. And if you come, great. If not, Thanksgiving's good too. So we appreciate it. And I apologize I did more talking in this one. This was basically presentation and argument from my view. Next time we'll open it up for arguments all the way around anytime.